Welcome to the third episode of the League Express podcast. My name is Jake Kearnan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler. Martyn, how was your weekend?
Oh, it was absolutely marvellous, Jake. I thought it was a tremendous Challenge Cup day at Wembley on Saturday. Three great games, and the Challenge Cup final itself, the men's Challenge Cup final in particular, was an absolute thriller with the sort of ending that you wish every game had in a strange way. You know, rugby league's a great sport, isn't it, when it's tightly contested, and you couldn't really have got a more tightly contested game than Saturday's game between Leigh and Hull KR, and I thought Leigh just about deserved to win it. To be fair, but it was a great historical game. Leigh's first win for 52 years, as everybody now knows. Obviously, Derek Beaumont, the Leigh owner, was absolutely here, there, and everywhere on the pitch at the end, and all credit to him for everything he's done to build that club up since buying them just about 10 years ago. I actually made the point in League Express this week, that some people think it's an overnight success for Leigh. Well, it isn't for Leigh and for Derek, because he actually came on the scene 10 years ago. And so in a sense, it's been a slow rise. But the incredible thing was the rebranding of the club during the close season last year, and their incredible ascendancy through Super League this year, and now winning the Challenge Cup. It really is it's a sort of Wizard of Oz type story, isn't it, really, I suppose?
Just a fairy tale.
Yeah.
And, I hope they've all recovered. I'm sure they celebrated the win to great lengths following that massive win over Hull KR. But we also saw a great match-up there with the women's, St Helens getting the win over Leeds.
Yeah, I was delighted for Jodie Cunningham in particular, but for all the St Helens girls. They've been a top women's side for a long time, and I think it was appropriate that they won the first ever Challenge Cup final at Wembley. Tara Jones scored the very first women's Challenge Cup final try at Wembley, which was a great achievement for her, and it was just a marvellous day for everybody concerned, I think, and it was great to see the St Helens chairman Eamon McManus there sitting next to Derek in the in the royal box, and obviously cheering Leigh on, I think is fair to say. So no, it was a wonderful day, and historic in so many ways.
And we also saw in the 1895 Cup, the Halifax Panthers got the win over the Batley Bulldogs. Now, that was a pretty tightly contested game as well. I managed to catch the end of it, and there was a freakish try scored in the corner at the very end of the game. I think it went through about every set of hands on the team.
And with one or two kicks as well.
That's right.
Yeah,
and the ball hit the ground 3 or 4 times. And
it was an extraordinary try, wasn't it? And certainly, if we're talking about a try of the year, certainly in terms of how many people handled the ball or kicked the ball, in that movement, it must qualify, mustn't it?
Yeah, that's
right. You would think. And it was such a shame in a way that Luke Hooley just missed the final goal kick, because that would have sent it into golden point time. And wouldn't it have been great to have 2 golden point finals at Wembley on Saturday?
Oh, absolutely. And it was just one of those moments where I wouldn't want to be in his shoes taking that kick, and I think his teammates were very very forgiving, as you would be, because that's no easy kick on any
not at all
day,
no
given in a final like that. But yeah, so I think there was about 58,000 in attendance, which I think that was sort of forecast around that 60,000 mark. What did you make of the atmosphere on the day?
I thought the atmosphere was fantastic, actually. I thought both sets of fans really got behind their teams and really gave it everything they had. And the atmosphere was as good as any Challenge Cup final I've ever been to, and I've been to quite a lot, as you can imagine. The crowd, though, was, disappointing. It was less than 2/3 full, given that Wembley holds more than 90,000. And we've got to find better ways of marketing this game. A lot of people have said, well, playing the Challenge Cup final on the opening on the opening weekend of the Premier League season wasn't a great idea. That's probably true, which is one reason why it's going to move to June next year. So we'll see whether that helps. But we do need to learn, our sport does need to learn how to market itself far more effectively. Because in my opinion, Jake, that game deserved a full house. The two teams gave everything, and it was incredible drama. We saw the emotion at the end of it. That did deserve a lockout crowd, in my view, and we need to work out a way to get back to that, because at one time Challenge Cup final crowds came very near to selling out Wembley. Sometimes they did sell out Wembley, and we've got to learn how to do that again.
Yeah, exactly right. And there's also been news recently that it's going to be played at Wembley again for the next 2 years, I believe, along with those new dates. Is Wembley Stadium the right venue to hold?
There's no doubt about it. It's a national stadium, and if you aspire to be a national sport, that's where you've got to play your biggest games. And we play the grand final at Old Trafford, so we already have a major game at a major venue in the north of England. If we took the Challenge Cup final away from Wembley, it would lose status, believe me, and that's not what we want to see happening. There are some people who suggest doing that, and I can understand it in a way, because obviously there are some difficulties associated with getting to Wembley. Apart from anything else, on Saturday there was a major accident on the M1 that interfered with some people's journey, but that could happen anywhere as well. There could be a road accident just virtually outside this building. I suppose it could stop us getting away. So you can't make judgments on that basis. But you've got to say that Wembley, particularly with the Wembley statue of the 5 great players who we had the statue put up in 2015. It's the home of the Challenge Cup final, and in my view, it always should be and always will be. And we should forget all about moving away from there. If we need to market the game more effectively to people who live in and around London, because I'm quite certain that there are lots of people living in London who, if they'd been at Wembley on Saturday, would have absolutely loved the game. We've just got to break through to reach those people and somehow get them coming to the game. And it's quite interesting, isn't it, that if you go to the American football at Wembley in October, you've got to pay £100 for a ticket. I think that's a minimum price as far as I'm aware. Going to Wembley on Saturday, the minimum price was £20. So we can't blame the cost of tickets. That's one thing for sure. And as I say, we've just got to be better at drawing people in. The RFL has got to develop a bigger marketing budget, and it's got to learn how to sell its games.
Absolutely. And I guess going forward, what do you make of the Leigh Leopards? Do you think that they've got what it takes to go on and win the Super League grand final?
Well, I don't think they will win it, but they could come pretty close. And there's no doubt that they have shown that they know how to win a trophy. I think Adrian Lamb's had a fantastic year with them. 2 years, really, because he obviously took them to promotion. But then everybody expected that last year. So last year he did what was expected of him. But this year he's gone way in excess of what was expected of him. And he's shown tremendous qualities as a coach. And I thought the way he handled Wembley last weekend, both in the lead up to Wembley, but also after the game, and his demeanour in the press conference, for example, was really demonstrated to me that he's a real great guy as well as being a great coach. And it's not too surprising, is it, Jake, that back in Australia there are beginning to be one or two murmurings about clubs who have spotted what he's done and might be making him an offer a little bit further down the track. And I think, we said at the end, didn't we? I think I asked him the question in the press conference, do you see yourself coaching in the NRL? And obviously he does, but not immediately, and certainly not as early as next year. But at some point, that will happen, I think.
Oh, exactly right. And I think with the NRL, it's always a matter of there's always discussions around who's the next coach. Who's going to be the one to take over
Absolutely.
when there is a coach that gets shown the door. But yeah, without a doubt, if he keeps Leigh Leopards on this run, I'm sure he'll attract heaps of interest from
Indeed.
clubs all over the shop.
And I certainly wouldn't write them off for the grand final. I mean, I don't honestly think they'll win it. But then again, if you'd asked me a few months ago, I wouldn't have thought they'd have won the Challenge Cup either. Yeah. So it's a wide open race and they're in the top four. They're secure in the top four. They're definitely going to finish in the playoff placings. So once you do that, absolutely anything is possible, isn't it?
That's right. And now on the other side of the ball, Hull KR unfortunately go down by 1 point. I don't think there's anything worse for a team to lose in Golden Point. I know with the NRL they've changed the rulings. It's extra time when in the finals when it does end in a draw in regular time. But for Hull KR, I guess now they can turn their attention to the Super League season. And as I might have mentioned that press conference with Willie Peters and Sean Kenny-Dow, that they don't have to sit there and dwell on the lost all off season. They can get straight back into it this week.
The curious thing is that when the Challenge Cup final is played before the end of the regular Super League season, as it normally is now, of course, there's a sort of strange reaction whereby the team that wins the Challenge Cup often has quite a few poor games afterwards. It's almost as though they've celebrated too hard and then they, fall away a bit. Whereas the team that loses very often bounces back quite quickly because obviously they won't have celebrated in quite the same way. And they'll be probably more focused on putting right, the wrong of that defeat and making sure that it doesn't happen to them again. So Hull KR, I think, will recover well, although they've got a really tricky game on Friday night at St Helens, which they could have perhaps done with an easier game straight after Wembley. But they're still in the top six. They're in sixth place, and they're battling to remain in the top six. Obviously, several other clubs are just outside the top six and are battling to get into it. But it's going to be a really interesting last 6 rounds of Super League, I think, Jake, this year. Yeah. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how it unfolds.
I think Hull KR might have been a little bit unlucky on Saturday with that sin binning of Elliot Minchella with a bit of contact on the kicker. What did you make of that call, Martyn?
Well, I thought it was a slightly harsh decision to send him off. I would have given him 10. Well, not a harsh decision rather to sin bin him. But having said that, he's now got a 1-match suspension. So obviously the match review panel have seen something in that challenge that they felt was illegal, and they've looked at it very carefully, and I obviously haven't to anything like the same degree. So you have to go along with that and say, well, maybe it was justified after all. But I thought at the time it looked a harsh decision, but fortunately for Hull KR, it didn't do them too much damage in the game itself, did it?
Yeah, they defended pretty well, and I don't think they let in any tries during the 10 minutes. Obviously, I think there might have been a penalty goal, but that's quite the effort, especially in the final with how well Leigh's middles are playing. Obviously, Lachlan Lamb was given the man of the match honours. There's a few other players that caught your eye up until that field goal, I believe. Who do you think performed well for Leigh?
I thought Rob Mulhern had a fantastic game. In fact, I thought the Leigh forwards, generally had, but I thought Rob Mulhern was outstanding. And if you remember, it was Rob Mulhern who made that incredible dash into the heart of the Hull KR defence in the tackle before Lachlan Lamb kicked the field goal. So he deserves an enormous amount of credit. I thought Sean Kenny-Dow was outstanding as the Hull KR captain, and if in some other circumstances could have won the Landstod Trophy. I liked Kai O'Donnell, the Leigh back row forward, who's a bit of an unheralded sort of a player. I think doesn't really get much personal publicity, but I thought he was outstanding the whole game. Every time he took the ball forward, he made really good yards after contact, And, he didn't... I don't think he made any errors. I've not checked the error count, but I don't recall him making any mistakes. And, I think he played really well, and several others. There were a lot of good performances on both sides, I thought.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think Willie Peters did touch on that with me on the captain's run on the Friday. He said, this game's going to be won through the middle. And, Leigh...
Most games are solid.
Really.
Yeah.
That's right. Now... We'll move on to some other news around the rugby league community at the moment. Now, just recently we've got word that Matt Parrish, the Samoan head coach, has stood down from his role. It came as a bit of a surprise, considering that, he just took that side to a World Cup final.
Yeah.
I guess, what was your initial reaction to this?
Well, I was surprised because the funny thing about Matt, who did coach Salford for a short time, by the way, some 10 or 12 years ago, Matt was criticised quite widely before the World Cup because it was said that there was quite a number of Samoan players who really didn't get on well with him. And I think their complaint was that he didn't seem to embrace the Samoan culture strongly enough, insofar as I understood what they were saying. But nonetheless, he stayed on and took them to that World Cup final after suffering a horrendous 60 points to 6 defeat against England in the first match of the tournament. They recovered enough to beat England in the semi-final, which was obviously disastrous for England, but great for Samoa. And there were some great scenes in Samoa itself of fans who were celebrating in the streets of the capital, Apia, and good for them. It was great, but. So I suppose we don't know why he's resigned. I've not seen any particular reason for his resignation, but I suppose it now opens the way for others to step in and to prepare the Samoans for what I think is going to be a Tri-Nations tournament this autumn with Australia and New Zealand. So let's see whether that happens. I don't know if it's been officially confirmed yet, but. Let's hope it goes ahead, and we'll see how they perform in that.
It'll be really interesting to see who takes over that head coaching role, because I don't know if it was a couple of years ago or last year, there was rumours swirling around that Matty and Andrew Johns might take over as.
Well, they've fallen out with each other now, though, haven't they?
That's right. So, those two are flat out hosting a radio program together, let alone coaching for Samoa. So it'll be interesting to see.
Sonny Bill Williams was mentioned as a potential coaching mentor as well, wasn't he, for that side? Because, of course, he's got Samoan heritage. So, and you would think that they've got a lot of people to pick from, because there are so many Samoan players now in the NRL, and presumably quite a number of Samoan coaches at various levels as well. So that will be interesting to see.
Exactly. And I think for me, I would personally love to see Matt and Andrew Johns take on that side, because you take all the foolishness that they get up to on their TV shows back in Australia, but listening to Matty Johns break down and analyse a game is something that true rugby league enthusiasts and students of the game will appreciate. He's just got this ability to break down a play, and I know growing up for me, I used to love watching all these funny segments on the Footy Show, which was on Channel 9, but when you listen to him on some of his podcasts... I used to enjoy
the Footy Show as well, yes.
Bring it back.
Yeah.
Now, I guess we'll move on. So there's been a little bit of coaching movement in the Championship. We've got is it James Ford taking on the Featherstone Rovers head coaching
Yes, well,
role?
he moved to Featherstone a few months ago, didn't he? And became, I think, was it the director of rugby there? But they've now pushed Sean Long out, despite them being 8 points ahead of everybody else in the competition. And Sean has immediately gone to Wakefield to be the assistant coach there. So that's really quite interesting, isn't it, that should happen in that way. And James is now the man in the hot seat at Featherstone who has the responsibility of taking them into Super League. So that's no mean responsibility, I've got to say. So good luck to him for... hopefully being able to do that.
I wonder how Sean feels. I mean, you did mention that they were 8 points clear, potentially an opportunity to go on and coach in the Super League. But
when a club sacks a coach, when the club is 8 points clear of all the opposition, you wonder what the real reason is for them having sacked him, don't you? And I mean, they said that they weren't very happy with the way that the team played against some of their nearest rivals. But that, may well be absolutely the right reason why they've given him the push. But you do suspect that there might be more to it than that. And if there isn't, then I apologise to the club. But, it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens now there.
Absolutely right. We also had another match played on the weekend, and I believe this was rescheduled due to the World Club Challenge at the start of the year, but St Helens 32 defeated the Giants 18. There's a little bit of controversy around this game surrounding a red card. Can you tell me anything about this, Martyn?
Well, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it was Joe Greenwood who got dismissed after 27 minutes, apparently for the use of the elbow. And so Huddersfield had to play 53 minutes with 12 men. They'd already had Matty English sin-binned earlier. But the interesting thing about this is that Joe Greenwood hasn't been suspended by the RFL's match review panel, which suggests that the incident wasn't anything like as serious as the referee, Ben Thaler, obviously thought it was on Sunday afternoon. So obviously the Giants will feel quite unhappy about that, because they actually lost 32 points to 18, but with just about 10 minutes to go, they'd fought back to 20 points to 18, and they looked as though they might just, be able to snatch the game late. So clearly that's not a bad achievement for 12 men, is it? So I don't know. We'll see what Ian Watson has to say about that, hopefully later this week at his pre-round 22 press conference, but I suspect he might not be all that happy with it.
That's right, especially the fact it can have huge ramifications for a side that's really contending at this end of the season.
Absolutely crucial for them, and they've actually got a really crucial game this Friday against Salford. If they win it, they'll be right in contention for the top six. If they lose it, it's going to be very difficult for them after that. So, it could hardly be a more important game. I suppose the good thing is that they will have Joe Greenwood available for that game now, whereas they might have thought he'd be suspended after being sent off. So, that's the more positive side of the coin, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the NRL announced late last week that it'll be taking 2 games over to Las Vegas in the US, starting from next year. I believe it's the Broncos, Sea Eagles, Rabbitohs and Roosters, I think, are all going over.
Yes, that's right.
What do you make of this announcement, and do you think it's good we're going over and trying to expand into the US market?
Well, do you fancy a trip to Las Vegas?
I'd love one. I was talking to my mates saying, boys, let's buy some plane tickets and go watch the games.
Absolutely, yeah. I think there'll be plenty of people going from Australia. I think they've said that, maybe as many as 5,000. And I think a few will go from England as well, because to see rugby league being played in Las Vegas would be a pretty unique experience, wouldn't it? So it's interesting, and it's going to be these 2 games are going to be played as a doubleheader, and they're going to be the week prior to the kick-off that every other club has in the NRL next season. They're going to be playing in quite a new stadium in Las Vegas, an American football stadium that holds, I think, 63,000 or something, a figure approaching that figure. My question is, how are they going to fill the stadium? How are they going to market the game to make it attractive to people who are in Las Vegas? And, that's the $64,000 question, you might say, isn't it? Because, of course, if they play the game and it's an empty or half-empty stadium, it won't look great, will it? And on the other hand, if they play in front of a real big sellout crowd, then it will look great. And hope, especially if the crowd responds to the game and the big hits and all the rest of it. So we'll have to see how it goes. Of course, the reason they're going is because Peter Vlandis, the chairman of the NRL, is very keen to cash in on some of the gambling money that's flowing around the United States at the moment, because as you probably know, in 2018 the Supreme Court there relaxed the rules on gambling at sporting events, and the gambling market in the United States has taken off since then. And I think Vlandis's plan is that people will be able to will be keen to bet on NRL matches because they'll be in a different time zone to NFL and other American sports, and he's fairly confident that in order to achieve that, it would be possible to get some good broadcasting contracts over there as well for NRL, for the NRL regular season. So interesting. I mean, a lot of people don't like the idea of gambling being associated with sport, but the fact is that it is, as we all know, and insofar as it is, I can't really blame the NRL for wanting its share of that money. But we'll just have to see. We'll just have to see how it goes. But it's an exciting prospect, and I think a lot of people will fancy the idea of going to Vegas for the weekend or for a week, and with the rugby league doubleheader being the climax of the whole weekend.
Absolutely. And that Allegiant Stadium where the game will be played, I was fortunate enough to do a tour of that stadium earlier this year. I went over and spent a week in Vegas, and just the facilities, they have the ability to roll the grass pitch, on and off, so I can get sunlight outside the stadium, and then they roll it back in for game day. I'm sure there'd probably be a few stadiums over here that do that as well, maybe.
I'm not sure.
But
that's interesting.
Impressive to watch.
Yeah, I bet it is, yeah.
So, yeah, they've got, top of the line facilities, and, hopefully they can get a good crowd along because, what a way to spend a week watching some rugby league in Vegas.
Well, Americans are really sports mad, aren't they? And this game will be in the close season of the NFL competition. So hopefully a lot of Vegas NFL supporters will come out in force. And let's hope that they do. And it's as I say, it's down to the way that the NRL manages to market that game.
I think they might be able to get a helping hand from Russell Crowe and Hugh Jackman.
I'm sure they will.
The Sea Eagles, Hugh Jackman's a huge fan of, and Russell Crowe, Rabbitohs. So
I think it's going to be a link to a sort of Aussie-themed week generally, isn't it, in Las Vegas in that particular week. So I think that will help an awful lot.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, other news around the league, there's been a few signings. Obviously, here in the Super League, we've got news today that Tyrone May, he's signing on with Hull KR from next year, I believe. And Herman Sasa is coming over from the NRL, the Dolphins, to sign with Hull FC. I guess we'll start with Tyrone May first. There's been a few players that are departing Catalans at the end of this year.
Quite a lot, yeah.
Is it worrying signs that there's all these players leaving?
Not necessarily. It just depends who they replace them with. And the thing about the Catalans is that they've made a lot of progress recently with some of their French players who really have come through and look to be ready to command, starting places with their team now. But they are signing players. I mean, the only just thinking about it now, the only one I can immediately think of is Chris Satai coming from Hull FC. But if you're going to sign a player, Chris Satai doesn't look a bad signing to me, and I should think Hull would be very sorry to lose him. I mean, Hull will be losing Chris Satai and Jake Clifford, two of their very best players from this season. So that would be obviously disappointing for their supporters. I just think we see a merry-go-round at the end of the season, and part of the interest for fans is seeing who's going where. And Tyrone May, I like Tyrone May as a player. I think he's done very well for the Catalans, and I'm sure he'll do well for his new club next year. So it's all grist to the mill, isn't it, as far as fans are concerned?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And still a little bit of speculation around what Mitchell Pearce will do at the end of the season.
I think he'll go back, personally. Whether he'll go back and join an NRL club for a last hooray, I'm not quite so sure. But, I thought West Tigers might be interested in him, but I don't know whether he would have been interested in them. But, of course, they look to be signing Aidan Caesar from Leeds. So, that Leeds are in an interesting situation, aren't they, with players leaving them as well.
No, absolutely. And name me a halfback at the moment who the Tigers haven't been linked with. They've been shopping for one for a very long time now.
Yeah.
And I think Caesar's their man now, so interested to see how they go in the years to come. But before we get into some of the recent NRL signings, we got news today that Fifita Pangai Jr. is going to retire at 27 years old. Obviously, he's not been long with the Bulldogs, but he played his first State of Origin match this year. Obviously represented Tonga. He had all the talent in the world. Still does have all the talent in the world, but his reasoning is he wants to pursue a boxing career. What did you make of this news today?
Well, I'll make a prediction about Fifita Pangai Jr. He may well miss next season, but he'll be back in 2025. Yeah. A boxing career is all well and good, but it's incredibly tough. It gives you a very uncertain future. It can end in the, flick of a switch almost if you, get knocked out by an opponent who you probably underestimate and so on. A lot of rugby league players have shown a great interest in boxing since Sonny Bill Williams and Paul Gallen pursued a boxing career after, in Gallen's case after retiring, in Sonny Bill's case, while he was actually still playing. But I think they're the exceptions really, and to actually succeed as a professional boxer, as a heavyweight, which Fifita would presumably be, is a hell of a tall order. And I think if he's only 27, he's young enough to come back into the game if that doesn't work out, and I'd be very surprised if that didn't happen.
Well, some would argue around the age of 27 you're meant to be sort of entering your prime.
Precisely. Well, he's giving up a $750,000 a year contract, isn't he?
That's right.
Well, that's, you've got to admire him for his courage in doing that, right. Because that's no small thing to do, is it really? Let's face it.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be giving up $750,000 to step into a ring and get punched in the head.
No.
But yeah, I agree with you, Martyn. I think, I wouldn't be surprised if we see him back in 2025. And I think for someone like Fifita, he needs a coach that's going to unlock his potential. And I think, we saw what he was capable of when he was playing for the Broncos under Wayne Bennett. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him return under Bennett at the Dolphins if Bennett was to still be coaching in 2025.
The really interesting thing about that, and that's true what you just said, and the interesting thing is that Cameron Ciraldo at the Bulldogs had a great reputation before he started coaching at the Bulldogs, didn't he? Everybody thought he was going to be a sensational success as a coach, and he may well be over time. But his first season with the Bulldogs has been actually very, very disappointing. And when you lose a player like Fifita Pangai Jr., who presumably believes that he's not been particularly well coached, or he presumably wouldn't be leaving, you've got to sort of question, well, is Cameron Ciraldo as good as he was cracked up to be? Well, next year maybe we'll find out. But it's very interesting, isn't it, that another Penrith assistant coach went to the New Zealand Warriors and has done a great job with them. So,
that's right.
Yeah,
I think looking forward to this season, over the off season, looking forward to this season. Anyone would have had Bulldogs finishing ahead of the Warriors on the ladder, and I think a lot of people were tipping the Warriors to finish in that bottom four sort of area, but obviously they're pushing for a top four finish this year. So
they're third now. Yeah.
So no, hats off to Andrew Webster. He's done a fantastic job. We've also had some other signing news. 3 big name Queensland located players. We had Payne Haas reportedly agreed to terms on a 3-year, $3.6 million, which I think works out to be around £600,000 per season. So there's been a lot of speculation.
Good for him, yeah. He was linked with a lot of other clubs, including the Bulldogs, but he's decided to stay with the Broncos, and I think he's very wise to do that. I mean, he even had offers from rugby union clubs, didn't he? The Western Force, based in Perth, was supposedly interested in him too. But I think, for him to stay with the Broncos is the best decision he can make, because the Broncos, at the end of the day, look like a potential Premiership winning side, and that's what he's looking for.
That's right. It's hard too, because I think a lot of his reasoning in the last contract negotiations was he wanted to be, a club that's winning. He wants to get paid for all the hard work he's putting in. There's no doubt he's the best front rower in the competition, and he wants to remain close to family. And I think Broncos tick every one of those boxes at the moment. And it's a great retention, because there's no doubt that rugby union was circling, and I'm sure they will approaching next World Cup as well, back on home soil. So, great to see Payne Haas re-signed as a Broncos fan. But moving on, just down the road at the Gold Coast, the Titans have re-signed both Tino Malawi on a 10-year deal worth $1.2 million per season, which is also £600,000 a year, and David Fifita on a 3-year, $3 million deal, which works out to about $500,000 a season. So,
well, they're certainly splashing the cash, aren't they, the Titans?
Oh yeah,
and I mean they're one of my favourite NRL clubs, which is because I had a very enjoyable time in the Gold Coast a few years ago. But I think they need to learn how to develop talent to go alongside their star players, don't they? Because they've not. Of course, they had Justin Holbrook coaching them for 2.5 years before sacking him earlier this year. Justin was never able to really get the Titans to be contenders, which is what they desperately want. They play in a great stadium, I think, and it's the Gold Coast is a marvellous place to visit, and but they need a successful NRL team, and a team can't be built around just 2 players. It's got to be, there's got to be a squad of 25 or 30 players who will deliver the goods for you, and they've yet got to learn how to do that. They've got Des Hasler coming next year, and I believe that Des Hasler was a major factor in these 2 players signing new deals. But we've got to see how that turns out. Des is a Premiership winning coach, of course, but we'll just have to see how he can handle the hot seat at Cbus Stadium, as it's called.
That's right, and I think there was a bit of panic around the club when Holbrook did get shown the door, because both Fifita and Tino had clauses in their contract to basically void their contract if there is a coaching change. So I'm sure the Titans fans are very stoked to have those 2 commit for the years going forward. In other news in the NRL over the past 7 days or so, the Rugby League Players Association have come to agreement with the NRL over the next CBA. This has been a long-going dispute I think it's spanned over 20 or 21 months now. They agreed in principle to a proposed agreement a few weeks ago, but then I think the NRL came back with all these changes to the proposed agreement. So we saw things like the media boycott that the players started, and they also started covering up the NRL logos on their jerseys.
Yeah, and those sort of things are silly in my view. I mean, I'm very supportive of the players and very supportive of the fact that they can negotiate on behalf of their members. But there are some things that they do. They were threatening to boycott the Dally M Awards night again, for example, which they did some years ago. And I think that's only harming themselves. The Dally M night is a great night for the players, especially the ones who have been successful. And I don't think that, the players are sort of shooting themselves in the foot by threatening to boycott that. But now that won't happen. Everything will go ahead, hopefully. And I think, there are some great deals that they've got for players. Players are going to have a level of security that they've not had before. I mean, the only thing that did disappoint me about this was that the NRLW, the women's competition, started 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the CBA dispute meant that they didn't have a proper launch with some of the female players speaking to the media prior to the start of that competition, which was disappointing. Having said that, if you've watched any of the women's games in the NRLW, they've been terrific. And, some of the women playing there are tremendous athletes, as we see in our competition, of course, as well. But, they've got 10 teams who look really well matched. And it's great to see women's sport is on such a high in Australia at the moment, of course, isn't it? With the FIFA Women's World Cup taking place there.
That's right, and we will have a match-up tomorrow morning, Australia
versus England. Yeah. Well, if Australia win, I'll never speak to you again.
I won't be invited back. That's all right. I'll be booking a return trip home back to Australia. But yeah, no, so it's obviously awesome to see the women's game thriving both in football and rugby league.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Fingers crossed Matildas can get a win. I'm sure you'll fingers crossed as well.
It's the Lionesses, yeah.
I'm quite happy that the CBA agreement's been, finalised. It's been dragging on in the media for far too long now, and there's been a real, the players have been prioritising player welfare post-career, which is something I think
absolutely, vital.
Both current and former players, will benefit from down the track. Another thing that I think that was a sort of a small detail, but the RLPA, I think the NRL wanted to cut their operating costs, which I think is just unfathomable given that we've now got 17 teams in the NRL and now 10, 12 women's sides as well going forward.
Yeah.
So
I think what the NRL needs to do now that it's got this sorted out, it needs to look at the health of the game at grassroots level in Australia, because there was I don't know whether you saw it, but there was an article in the Sydney Morning Herald recently which suggested that, written by Roy Masters, which suggested that the game in the country areas is losing out in competition to AFL, which would be a matter of great concern, I would have thought, to anybody in rugby league. And we need to make sure that the kids throughout Australia get the chance to play rugby league and don't get overwhelmed by the resources that the AFL is pouring into their sport, across the country, which you've got to say the AFL is a very smart organisation, and the NRL has got to rise to that particular challenge, I think.
And I think the NRL doesn't want to fall into that same trap that I think like Queensland Rugby Union and I guess Rugby Australia has fallen into, because there's been criticism of them in terms of the funding they've given to grassroots rugby union. They sort of rely on that private school system to produce a lot of their talent. So I think, the NRL will be looking very closely at that and trying to invest all the money they can. Fingers crossed they do. Because
hopefully so, yes.
You need a thriving grassroots game for your professional level.
And then, of course, they've got to decide where their next team is going to be located. And that's a very interesting question for them, I think, and there are lots of potential candidates, aren't there?
Yeah, that's right.
Not least in New Zealand. I mean, it was interesting to see that the West Tigers versus New Zealand Warriors game was played in the city of Hamilton at the weekend, and got a complete sellout crowd there. Which suggests how much appetite there is for rugby league in New Zealand at the moment, particularly with the Warriors doing so well. So I think the NRL is in a really enviable position. And I hope they make the right decisions in terms of expanding the game, in future years.
Absolutely right. And I think it also helps that the NRL has been a great product this year. It's a very tight competition, much like the Super League as well. There's a lot of teams fighting for those few final
Well, 12
spots.
teams still competing for the 8 positions out there.
That's right. So
with only 3 weeks to go.
Yeah, it's going to be a very tight finish, that's for sure. Now, I think we sort of covered nearly everything. The one thing I did want to touch on you with is the key matchup this Friday, the relegation matchup, you could almost say. Castleford Tigers up against Wakefield Trinity. Are you going to head along to this match? Or are you going to expect a sellout?
I would think so, and I think it has sold out already, and it's going to be a desperate game. I mean, it's not going to be conclusive, of course, because there are still 6 rounds to go. So even if assuming that one team wins and the other loses, it won't necessarily decide who's going to be relegated, but it will go some way towards doing so. And last time these two teams met with this sort of situation prevailing was in 2006, but then it was the last game of the season when Wakefield hosted Castleford, and Wakefield won that game, and Castleford were relegated, and they couldn't do anything about it. But this time it's different by being placed differently in the season. I honestly don't know. I haven't got the slightest idea who's going to win this game. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see Blake Austin debuting for Castleford, as I assume he will. Obviously, Wakefield are going to go into the game full of confidence. They've been playing better than Castleford in recent weeks, but now that Castleford have got they've got Danny Ward in place as their new coach, we've got to see whether Danny can deliver the win that they desperately need. And gosh, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah,
absolutely. It really is.
Yeah, it'll be a very good atmosphere, I'd imagine.
It
as
will.
Well. So,
yeah.
Who knows? I might even try and sneak up and watch it as well.
Well, you should.
Yeah. Now, anything else you'd like to add, or any other interesting news swirling around at the moment?
Yeah, well, one thing I'd just like to say, we are, as a company, producing a new book that some people will have seen advertised already in League Express and on social media. And it's a book of 50 Wigan legends in their own words that's been written by one of our regular contributors, Richard de la Riviere, who writes a weekly column on Rugby League Heroes in League Express, and it's a book about 50 of the greatest Wigan players who Richard was able to talk to. So obviously it doesn't go back to players who've been long since passed away, but players who were alive to be able to speak to him. And it's a great book, I can tell you. Every Wigan fan will love it, and every Rugby League fan will love it, because Richard's got a great writing style, full of humour and interesting things that you perhaps didn't know about some of these players. They all give their sort of life story in a sense. And you can actually get hold of a copy of the book by looking on our website, totalrl.com, going to the shop and buying it. And it's only 25 quid. But I think it'll be one of the best investments you could possibly make if you enjoy reading about rugby league. So I just wanted to end on that note, Jake, and say, we hope that one or two of the folk watching this this podcast will actually take up that opportunity to buy that book.
Oh yeah, and it sounds like it'll be a crucial piece of Wigan and rugby league history if you can get your hands on a copy of that book.
Absolutely.
50 players, I'm sure that must have taken a long time to compile all those testimonies.
Yeah, it did. But Richard's a very assiduous guy, and you can see every single player is shown on the front page of that book. So that's going to be really well worth buying, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll wrap it up here. Obviously, if you are watching this video and you've got to leave to go somewhere, you want to stream it on your phone, you can always listen to this on Spotify and Apple Podcasts are sort of the main two. Whereas, if you are listening to this in the car and you'd prefer to watch Martyn and I sit here and talk, you can obviously search up Total Rugby League on YouTube and find the episode on there as well.
Thank you, Jake, and great to see you again, and look forward to next time.
No worries. Thank you, Martyn.